Right, well, good morning everyone and welcome to the Mobility Power Couple webinar. In this session, we'll be looking at how Topia got to where they are today, followed by diving into some trends we're seeing across the field. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to enter your questions to the right of the screen and we can revisit these at the end. The session will also be recorded and this will be available on our website for you to return to if needed. We are joined by Topia's very own Gordon Walsh and Ellen Shipley. Gordon is the VP of EMEA for customer success with responsibility for implementations and customer health. Previously, he was head of EMEA for Polaris, having been Polaris's first employee in EMEA back in 2011. Ellen has been with Topia in the customer success area for 2 years. Prior to that, she managed large in-house programs for companies such as EY and American Express. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Gordon and Ellen.
Thanks, Lily. So just intro, really, I think, one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about, and hopefully something that's interesting for all of you, is sort of the reason why, Move Guides and Polaris came together. So as most of you know, in January of this year, Move Guides acquired Polaris. I think there's a lot of questions from the mobility industry at large as to why that made sense, or why both companies, coming together was really the right thing to do. And I think to start with, as we work through that overall process of bringing both companies together, I think really the synergies and the similarities across both teams and both organizations just became very apparent early on. I really mean that in terms of just the culture, the approach, and just the people involved working on both sides and in both legacy companies. Both teams really had quite a strong passion for solving complex mobility challenges and really just addressing and solving, mobility problems through the use of technology primarily. I think the reality is that both companies were effectively trying to tackle the same thing, but just coming at it from very, very different angles. In the legacy Move Guides organization, we're really looking at the relocation services and relocation management consulting through technology, solving those challenges with a strong focus on the employee and using technology and having the employee at the center of absolutely everything, but utilizing technology to make that actual move just smoother and more seamless. And certainly from a legacy Polaris point of view, we originally set out by looking to solve complex payroll challenges and issues for large organizations, and just started out really as a company who were supporting payroll through the use of technology, and we built that up to really include and incorporate assignment management with a focus just on workflows and automation and utilizing technology to really have a focus on the mobility teams and the HR teams and essentially those back office functions. I think certainly from a Polaris perspective, a lot of the feedback we'd heard in the marketplace over the past year to 18 months was about us needing and requiring to build out just an enhanced employee perspective and an employee experience. And I think when we saw what the Move Guides team had worked on and feverishly built out over time, I think, from our point of view, it was something that would have taken us a long amount of time to get to. And it really brought home just those similarities and synergies between the companies and why bringing them together really made so much sense.
Yeah, and as Gordon said, from the Move Guide side of things, while we had a great offering for the employee and we made it easy for the HR teams to deal with the mobility aspect of the move, what we were hearing frequently was that there was a requirement to do more around the robustness of the reporting and the ability to deliver more in the form of the payrolls and the planning, and the sort of behind the scenes mobility that we weren't necessarily as focused on when Move Guides was founded. And so, when the two teams sat down and looked at what the other was doing and the direction everybody was going in, it was pretty obvious we were going in the same direction, and it made a whole lot of sense to just join forces rather than, keep going down the same track separately. So as we just said, those of you who are familiar with Move Guides know that the company was founded in 2012 by Bryn Kennedy, who was in the banking industry and was relocating around the Asia Pacific region and thinking to herself, there must be a better way to do this. You know, she said that she was talking to far too many people and trying to manage far too many different things without sort of a central repository for everything that needed to be done and all of her documentation and her contacts and things. So she founded Move Guides. And today in 2018, as we said previously, we've acquired Polaris, and we now have the full global mobility management suite that focuses on all aspects of the move, from the initial upfront planning and delivering the payroll to the relocation itself and what the employee needs to do. And then we are moving, the 4-year plan in 2022 is to provide a seamless agile workforce management technology solution that will cover all aspects of a company's globally mobile population. And you know, what we're seeing is that in today's world, your population is more and more mobile, whether you mean for it to be or not. And so the plan is to get ourselves in a position where we're able to help you with all kinds of mobility.
And I think, you know, I think that's a very common thread across most of the meetings and customers that we talk to, is really just being able to support agility in the workforce, you know, as we move towards, you know, being truly barrier-less across organizations, so that people really can work from anywhere. I think the requirements around agility are changing, and I think that's a challenge that we're really excited in hopefully solving and certainly attempting to solve over the next number of years as we look to transform what we do and to change how we're supporting organizations as well, with a really strong focus on that agility. And you know, I think, you know, we're talking about bringing both companies together really at the end of January or beginning of February this year. So it's been less than 6 months at this point. But I think the really exciting thing that we've seen over those 6 months already is just having people from both legacy organizations just looking at problems, challenges, and bringing ideas to the table from their experience to help with some of the challenges that we faced on either side of the table. Really bringing all of that together, putting things in the one place and having those ideas and just a fresh set of eyes, I think, to look at some of the challenges that each organization was facing. I think it's been really interesting and really energizing for all of us within the organization and within the company. You know, that's something that's really worked very well, and certainly something that we've been looking to tap into and look to tap into even further as we go through 2018 and 2019.
Yeah, somebody who's come from managing in-house programs, for me, it's pretty exciting to see the direction that technology is heading, and all the things that I used to say about, wouldn't it be great if we had, or if the system could do, or if I could just push a button. And it's looking closer and closer to reality. So it is, as Gordon said, very exciting. So a lot of times we're getting a lot of questions about how we actually landed on Topia as a name. And it comes from the word utopia, which is paradise. And topia itself as a word is, it refers to a place. And so given that the mission of the company is to allow your employees to work everywhere, you know, to create an open world where everyone has the ability to work from a location, where the borders aren't stopping you. You know, our technology is there to provide you with the ability to manage people who are working from everywhere, to make sure that, you know, where they are, that they're compliant with whatever local regulations exist around tax or immigration or, you know, anything else that might be there. But it also gives your employees the freedom, obviously within your internal frameworks, to work where it works for them.
And I think just to talk a little bit about, you know, where we are today, sort of 6 months, as I say, post bringing those organizations together. I mean, in terms of Topia, you know, we're certainly looking at an annual growth rate of in excess of 100% year on year. At this point, we've raised in excess of $90 million from investors and from external investment. You know, we've got a very high and a very strong customer retention rate in excess of 97%. That is something that we're incredibly proud of, and is a huge focus for everything that we do here within Topia. We've also got well over 100 customers globally that we're supporting today, both from the legacy Polaris, legacy MoveGuides point of view, and you know, as a joint organization now within Topia, bringing all of the economies of scale and advantages that we have as a result of bringing both organizations together. You know, we've got well over 200 Topians globally in a number of different locations spread across APAC, EMEA, and America, of course, as well, in a number of different locations there. And, you know, I think just to mention, diversity is a big part of who we are, and it's something that we're very proud of, that, you know, our workforce is effectively made up of 50% male, 50% female, and that also applies across our leadership team also. And just the final point to mention is something that's important to us as an organization, is that we donate a percentage of our revenue on an annual basis to Mobility for All, which is an organization that Bryn created, you know, really after visiting Calais in January of 2017 and just seeing some of the conditions there. You know, I think the reality of the situation is we're very fortunate, many of us, to be in the position we're in, and, you know, we focus on moving a lot of high earners, high performing people who are really, you know, in a very fortunate position around the world. And while we deal with day-to-day issues, sometimes related to, you know, shipping or operational things or costs as well, it's good to always remember and think of those who are less fortunate. And we make sure as an organization that we are putting aside a percentage of our revenue on an annual basis to support those less fortunate than us, and to address some of what really are true mobility issues across the globe. You know, today, within our product offering, we really offer five products within our suite. And, you know, together we certainly believe that provides a very unified global mobility management solution for any customers or potential customers who are out there. You know, within those sort of 5 products that we have as a core offering, you can see that the Go sits right at the center of that, and Ellen's going to talk about that in a second. But just to touch briefly upon what those products are. So within the Manage product, really what we're doing is using workflows and automation in the system, and also integration with HRIS systems to really manage programs and allow customers to manage their programs effectively. So it's all about just having visibility into their program, who is where, managing them on a day-to-day basis using data and technology, and then utilizing automation and workflows and integration, just to provide an all-around good employee experience, but also to mainly support the mobility and HR teams in the organization. If I move to the top left-hand corner, then the Plan product really just allows for scenario planning by generating cost estimates in, you know, a matter of minutes, and by calculating, by running balance sheet calculations, just to give that cost visibility and ability to, you know, effectively predict and allow people to plan out programs in terms of looking at spend, you know, looking at that cost base, and just to have that planning in place so that all of the other actors are really approving and moving things through as they need to as part of the process. And then the next logical step in that process, as I move down the chart, is the Pay product, which really is about supporting payroll. So that's payroll instructions, compensation collection or accumulation, and it's about utilizing technology to pay employees globally, just in a timely, efficient and accurate manner, and also including that ability to integrate with existing payroll systems, to make sure that that flow through is working correctly in all of the locations where you're trying to pay all of your globally active assignees.
Right, and then as Gordon said, in the center of all of this is Go, which is your employees. And Go is the product that allows them to keep track of everything that's happening with their move. And it's their employee hub that has the task list that gives them the timeline of what they need to do, when they need to do it, and how they need to do it. It lets them explore our city guide so they can get to know their new location without being on the ground yet, and, you know, look for things as diverse as local entertainment, restaurants, gyms, but also how to find a doctor or whatever local registrations are required. And there are a lot of links to things like that in the city guide so that everything is at your employees' fingertips. And then the Move product, which many of you would already be familiar with, is the actual move itself, and the how do we get your employee from A to B, and how do we provide those services that are required to get your employee to the new location with their, you know, household goods, find them a place to live, and everything else that's associated with that.
Yeah, so just having had a look at how both companies came together, why that made sense. We're just going to take a look at some macro trends really that we're seeing across the global workforce that really kind of reinforce hopefully what we're saying in terms of why it made sense to bring both organizations together, and why we're looking at agility within the workforce, and why that's such a big challenge to solve, and such an exciting challenge as well for us to look at and to take on in conjunction with our customers over the next number of years.
Yeah, so I was telling Gordon earlier, I was on holiday in Nicaragua earlier this year in May, and I got up one morning and did an amazing beachfront yoga class. And as we finished, the sun had come up, and I looked over at the building next to this yoga shala, and it was a very modern glassed-in building that had clearly amazing air conditioning based on the condensation on the windows, and a lot of desks and things. And I was told, yeah, if you want reasonable Wi-Fi that's reliable and inexpensive here on Papoya Beach, that's the place to go. That's a co-working location. And as this is a surfer beach, sort of in the middle of nowhere. And as I watched, people started trooping in, and they were in board shorts. They were propping bicycles and surfboards outside, and they were going in and hopping onto a desk, and logging in and presumably going about their day's work from this, amazing space on a beach on the Emerald Coast of Nicaragua. And that really brought home to me just how much our landscape has changed with regards to work, because 10 years ago, nobody would have even dreamed that that would be possible. And yet, I don't know what sort of employment these folks that I was seeing had, but, it was obviously a very well subscribed co-work location. And I think it goes a long way to something that's near and dear to everyone's heart around employee satisfaction and employee engagement, and being able to offer people the opportunity to work from places like that if it fits the job and the requirements of the company, is an amazing thing.
Yeah, and I think it ties in nicely with what we're sort of seeing and what we're talking about when it comes to sort of just how economies are interconnected globally today. It's something that we've run into with a number of the customers that we work with today, and I think most multinationals are looking at resolving that as well, or benefiting really from global value change. Yeah, and so I think the real thing about that is the connectivity there is just becoming ever more prevalent. We're seeing a lot of large organizations just embrace those global value change, and this is driven mainly by things like technological progress, as Ellen's talked about in Nicaragua, of course, there, as well as costs, reducing costs and savings, but also access to resources and also markets as well. A lot of the companies that we work with are really starting to incorporate in locations that they previously wouldn't really have considered. And a lot of that's just driven by having access directly to those markets, and the resources as well in those locations, where there's a lot of locations where there's resources more readily available than there are in others now, and tapping into that is a big key to success for many of the organizations that we're working with today.
Well, one other thing as well, I touched on employee engagement, and I was reading the New York Times earlier this week, and I saw a reference to a survey that was done fairly recently that noted that up to 70% of employees in the United States are considered to be disengaged. And we've all seen the studies about what a difference having an engaged workforce can make to your company, the product, the output, and just what comes from a workforce that's actively engaged with what you're doing and believing in the company's mottos and reasons for existence. And 70% disengagement is a pretty scary figure. And if you think about being able to allow your employees to have these experiences where they're moving around the world and experiencing different cultures and working with people in different locations and really getting to understand the company itself, not just one desk in one office from the day that they start, I think that can make a huge difference in the level of engagement. And that is something that we hear more and more frequently as people obviously people worry about the salaries and the benefits and things. That's a big part of everything. But it's also about what it's really like and what's it going to be like to work for this company. And if you're able to offer them a mobile solution that allows them, whether it's working from Nicaragua, as I said, or just working from home once a week, it can be huge. But you have to do it in a manner that is compliant, as I'd said, with whatever rules and regulations are in force in the location that your people want to be in.
Yeah, I think that's nice, that relationship between employee and employers as well. I think that's something that we're really seeing quite drastically over the past couple of years in particular. I can't remember the last time that I did an interview either here in Dublin or in London where I didn't have a question about flexibility, whether it was about the ability to work from home or about some other aspect of the role, about our approach and how flexible we were going to be in just facing the challenges or helping to deal with the challenges or manage the challenges that employees are dealing with today. And I think that there's a bit of a shifting balance of power there as well, as Ellen's alluded to. There's not just a need for flexibility, but certainly there's a huge need for engagement. Even when we're talking to sort of college graduates and younger people entering the workforce for the first time, salary is not necessarily the initial determinant of whether they're going to accept a role. It's really whether they want to buy into what you're doing. So do they feel engaged in the interviewing process? And do they feel that that's been pretty smooth for them? Have they been impressed by you, by the organization, by the employer as they've gone through that process? And then, furthermore, are they really buying into what you're trying to do? I think, you can't expect employees to be engaged unless they're buying into what you're trying to do, whether that's in your department or your organization or your company overall. But having that sort of belief in the path that you're going down, and also having that passion for what you want to do, I think is a key thing. And we really see that, very commonly across the companies we work with and here within Topia as well. As I say, when we're going through even interview processes with new employees, whether that's in San Francisco or Seattle or Dublin or London or Hong Kong or Melbourne, it doesn't really matter. It's really a common theme where engagement is absolutely at the key. And unless that engagement is really high, then, employees are not willing to join the organization or not that interested in joining the organization. And I think that's a very, very common thread. And flexibility is a huge part of that.
One of the other things that we've also seen is a change in both the types of assignments that are being used with companies and the profiles of the people that are going out on assignment. So, the days of the mid to upper level manager with the 3 years to whatever location in full support and then back to the home location are long gone. And we've seen a real trend towards more shorter term assignments or rotational assignments where people might be on a program that over a 2-year period, they're in 3 or 4 different locations. And the profiles have changed as well. The number of women going out on assignment is on the increase. You get a lot of people who expect to go out from the start. They don't graduate from university and spend a few years working at a home location. They want to get out there and get moving right away.
Yeah, and I think, just tying into what we were talking about earlier, I think just the number of employee-initiated moves is certainly on the rise as well. So, that's certainly helping with companies in terms of the organizing, because, those employee-initiated moves, typically require a little less handholding than we would see for the typical or more traditional policies that are out there. But, I think a lot of the employees certainly that we're talking to and that we're meeting with really are saying that, look, cultural diversity, experiencing different locations, different countries, and experiencing something different is hugely important to me. And if I can move, if my company can facilitate me spending 6 months or 12 months or even longer in a different location, whether that's in a different city or a different continent entirely, it's a very, very appealing thing. And where that can be supported, there's huge levels of engagement. And it is really important to most of the employees that we're speaking to. And I think it ties into sort of just cultural diversity and also employees wanting to feel part of something. So not just part of the office that you sit in the city that you live in, but just part of a community, part of a larger global community. And yeah, as I mentioned, in terms of just engagement and overall employee satisfaction, that seems to be a big factor. And definitely those employee initiated moves are becoming more and more prevalent with most of the organizations that we're working with. Just to touch then on some specific things in EMEA mobility that we're running into quite frequently at the moment. I think the first one, the hot topic that you can't get away from in Europe at the moment, is really about Brexit. So the impact of Brexit in the UK and the EU, and I just want to preface this by saying that the prevalent mood is really one of uncertainty still. There's not a lot of time left before the UK government and the EU have concluded on the negotiations in order to meet the deadline date for next year. But there's still an awful lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen, particularly in the immigration space, which is obviously key. So particularly a lot of the financial institutions we work with have, Brexit policies in place now and are moving people from the UK into Central Europe, so into places like Frankfurt, into Paris, sometimes into Dublin as well. And they have fairly light touch policies designed. I think what they're trying to do in most cases, as we see it, is just move people who won't run into potential future immigration issues. So wherever EU citizens are looking to relocate to other cities, that's sort of the first port of call, where that person meets the skill needs or the skill set that's required in the new location. But I think above all, really, even though there are some policies defined by a number of the companies that we're working with, there's really that uncertainty about what the overall impact is going to be and how that's going to work after 2019. So I think more clarity is absolutely required there before we've got some better answers around a lot of what our customers are doing right now.
I do think that Sajid Javid's, the UK Home Secretary's idea for the app that will have the 3 questions that anyone from the EU currently living in the United Kingdom can complete, and then it goes off to the Home Office and they'll have a determination on whether or not they're able to stay in a relatively short time frame. And I think that's a great step in the right direction, just to help with some of the uncertainty, because as Gordon said, some of the financial institutions have pretty detailed Brexit plans, and we've all probably read about the plans to move people to Dublin or to Frankfurt and things like that. But a lot of other companies are still in a sort of a wait and see mode. And what I've seen is a real decrease in the number of British workers being sent out to the EU and EU workers being brought into the UK, which is challenging for companies who need to have the ability to move their best talent or their required talent wherever they need to be. And the continued uncertainty around, should I do this, should I not, what if I spend the money and I have to go home, and what is this going to look like, is really causing some challenges for people.
Yeah, I think one of the other trends is probably not a specific EMEA one; it's a global one, and it's not necessarily new, but it's certainly the centralization, the digitalization of mobility. So, we're talking about using full technology solutions or hybrid solutions to support programs. So I think part of that ties into expectations. So I think in terms of employee expectations, with some of the surveys that we would have done last year, the feedback that we'd see certainly from employees would be, I'm gone beyond the point at which I want to, or I should have to make a phone call in order to organize a call with, my relocation consultant, for example. I expect technology to support me better in that. And I think that employee feedback's coming through to the mobility, the HR teams and the HR BPs. And it's something that we're seeing as well, where, there needs to be a better use of technologies to support that move and to make it more seamless for employees who are moving. And particularly, there's people on career assignments or who are moving in every 6 months. They really want this to be much easier than it is, or than it's sometimes shown to be for them in the past. I think the big thing around that, though, is, as we talk to our customer base or potential customers as well, that there's still an element of hand-holding that's just never going to disappear. I think, within the mobility sphere, I think we recognize that it's quite a niche industry, and certainly the approach that we've taken is a little bit niche as well. It's important to recognize that, but most of the customers that we work with are saying, well, actually, we need that. So we need to balance the technology solution with the ability to engage with our employees, to really make them feel loved as we move them around, and to keep those engagement levels that we've talked about quite a bit already as high as we possibly can.
Yeah, this is the one time when we're moving people around the world. I mean, obviously, your work life is a huge part of your life in general, but relocating to another country is something that impacts every single thing that you do, from where you buy your coffee on a Saturday morning and get your newspaper, to where your children go to school and how they interact with other, with their grandparents. They're no longer just up the road. They're Skype and half a world away. And you can't underestimate the impact that that can have on people. And I think for that reason, the requirement to have the higher level of handholding is never going to go away. There's always the challenge of costs and keeping those as low as possible, which is why you do need to have the robust technology solution behind that. And one of the really critical things is, your people can't be online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if your mobility program is headquartered in the United States, but your assignee happens to be in Tokyo with an issue, not being able to reach somebody isn't going to be a great answer for that person. And so that's where technology really comes into its own, by providing the platform where the information can all be stored, where notes can be kept, where messages can be left, where there's an element of self-service. And as long as everybody's playing their part, everyone is able to know exactly what's going on with that particular employee and the assignment in real time, no matter what time zone they're in.
Yeah, and I think moving on to that, I mean, is another really common thread that, it certainly isn't new. It's something that we've been talking about for many years in the industry. It's really about having visibility and transparency in spend, just being able to plan effectively. I think, again, it sort of ties in a little bit to the expectations, which I think have changed quite drastically over the past 4 or 5 years. I think, from an internal point of view, whether it's finance teams or whether it's the HR leadership teams, really, not having that visibility into spend is just no longer acceptable for most of the customers that we're working with. I mean, it's an absolute requirement and it's an expectation that you know how much your mobility program is costing you, what your mobility spend is, and where you're spending it. And then it ties into, just trying to use data to make sure you can analyze it correctly afterwards, and make sure that it ties into things like employee engagement, employee retention as well. But certainly having that visibility in the first case as to spend, and having reasonably accurate cost estimates come out, is something that's really a requirement from an internal business perspective now. And being able to compare those budget to actuals, and then being able to determine success, of course, is the next step in that. But at least having the budget to actuals and the real data around that, and having better quality data available to make more informed decisions is absolutely key in that space.
And that's something we've been hearing from our clients for quite some time, and I'm sure all the internal mobility teams are hearing it as well. Is yes, I think the first thing every finance director says is, this is costing us too much, mobility is too expensive. And part of the need for robust data is to be able to educate your internal teams on where the money's going. Generally, tax is usually a huge part of any mobility program spend, but being able to show what is going into that component, and being able to point to the data that says, this is what we spent, this was the tax effect, this is in real time. It's very, very powerful. And as long as I found people, as long as they understand where the money's going, they're a little bit more okay with the numbers. But also having visibility and accuracy in the data that you're looking at around your spend can help you benchmark what you're doing and understand what is and isn't working in your program. And that's another way that you can look at keeping the costs in check is, where are you seeing exceptions? What benefits might you be offering that are getting very low take up, and what is it that your employees are most frequently looking for that you may not be offering? And again, that goes back to the employee engagement. It's very powerful to be able to look at that and say, okay, you know what, this seems to be what's more important to our people, so we'll tailor our policies accordingly.
Yeah, and then just finally, before we open it up for any questions that there might be, I mean, I think, diversity and inclusion is something, as I've already mentioned, that we certainly pride ourselves on in Topia. But, we really do think that there's a huge value in terms of being able to leverage mobility to support diversity and inclusion within your programs, within your employee base as well. And it does sort of tie into some of those employee initiated moves and the desire to move around, experience different cultures, which I think we unanimously agree that that really does tie into having a diverse organization and really having people feel included and feel like they're part of a community as well. I mean, internally, we've tried to do a number of things just in terms of simply engaging with recruitment companies in terms of our expectations around candidate diversity when we're hiring for the roles that we have. And there's some simple steps that we've seen a number of companies take to ensure that, you know, diversity is high in their organization and that people really do feel included as part of a community and as part of something larger when they join into an organization, when they start working with a company, and when they're moving to other locations around the world to sit in different offices and to work with colleagues and partners. So with that, I was just going to open it up to see if there's any questions that are coming through. So we have allowed just a couple of minutes at the end for questions. Alan and I are obviously more than happy to address anything that you may want us to delve into in a little bit more detail, or anything that you certainly like us to follow up on.
Thank you, Gordon and Ellen. I've actually got a couple of questions that have come through, but attendees, please do feel free to type them in the question tab on the right of your screen. So firstly, how do you prioritize the benefits of introducing a tech specialist compared to a traditional RMC that's brought external tech to the offering?
Ellen, do you want to take that one?
I think for me, what I see most frequently, what my clients tell me they value the most, is that we are a tech-led solution where everything really is in one place, whether it's from the employee's perspective, the HR side of things, whether it's their payroll or the actual benefits being provided on the relocation itself. And there's also the self-service aspect that we offer, that a tech solution offers, where you're able to get a lot of the information without any sort of manual intervention. So it does cut out a whole lot of the middleman, I guess would be the best way to put that, where it's empowering for both the HR teams and the employees, rather than saying, oh, I need to call, you know, X and see if they can run a report for me, or see if they can tell me this, or help me out with that. It's a platform that enables you to go in and actually start looking yourself. And not to say that we're not here if you need assistance. We offer all kinds of training and you know, bespoke reporting and everything else. But I find that that's something that my clients really value.
I think partly as well, who we are sort of ties into that too. So yeah, absolutely, technology is to the fore, and you know, we're obviously looking for customers to utilize our technology to the maximum in terms of how they use that and how it supports them in their programs. But you know, we are effectively mobility people, so we're people who've been in the industry primarily for a long time, and you know, within our customer success organization, you know, the people who implement or ultimately the people who support post go live are people who've been working, you know, in one company or the other for a very long time, and are very familiar with the industry and very familiar with what our clients do and how to benchmark as well. And that's really in our DNA, and it's a key part of who we are, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, the industry, the mobility industry is quite niche when we look at it versus, say, HR or reward. And so being able to support that requires people who are strong in mobility and have mobility backgrounds. So I think that's a big part of who we are too.
Thank you. One more. What are some of the biggest challenges global mobility management faces when trying to present a business case to move to a software provider from a traditional RMC?
Oh yeah, there tend to be a lot. I think you know, I think to start with, there's always that cost-led discussion as well. And I think, you know, when we start working with a lot of companies, maybe the total costs or what they're totally spending on supporting their program is not, you know, necessarily transparent or not necessarily available. There may potentially be a lot of hidden costs where, you know, some of the vendors who are doing sort of tax work or tax consulting are also doing some additional services as well. And so certainly that cost can be a bit of a challenge, because ultimately you're looking to start paying for software, but you know, previously the costs may have been baked in somewhere else or may have been inherited by another part of the business. So there's always that trade-off. You know, I think in terms of building out the business case, that's a great place to start, because I think, you know, when we work with a lot of companies or potential, you know, potential future clients, that's the starting point that we use. It's all right in terms of cost benefit analysis and in terms of total savings, what are we looking at here, and how can we help? I think once you've bridged that gap, then you know, I think there are other things that need to be addressed internally in terms of who really are the stakeholders, and just having visibility into that and bringing them in as early as possible is a huge thing, because, you know, maybe you're going to use a mobility system for doing things like intercompany transfers, or giving the finance team, you know, better access to spend in terms of your cost centers or your entities, or how you structure that or allocate that. If that's the case, then, you know, the more engagement you've got from the finance team early on, the better they can help you fight that case internally, and do that, you know, equally with payroll as well. If you're looking to engage the payroll teams and use payroll automation or have payroll feeds running, then I think engaging with the payroll teams and having them really sitting there with you as you build up that business case can be incredibly powerful, and can send a really, really strong message to the business as you try to build that out over time.
The other thing that I see, and I point out frequently, is you know, what about the time that your internal teams are spending on the simple day-to-day management of things, as opposed to getting in front of the business, working on the strategy for mobile employees. Where does business want to go? How can we help? They're firefighting in the trenches, and having a technology solution where they can literally look up pretty much anything that they want without having to go to someone else. Again, when you start analyzing the amount of time that your internal teams save, and it's not just the mobility team, it's also the payroll team with an interface with technology, so that the compensation and the benefit information feeds directly into payroll without manual intervention. There's huge savings there. Just in talking about the time involved with your internal team. And there's a huge savings there.